Millions of individuals engage in gambling activities every day for entertainment and recreation. Most gamblers are able to do so without experiencing any serious consequences. However, according to recent studies, up to 1% of people develop gambling addiction, also known as gambling disorder. Gambling disorder is more than just a love for the thrill of the game. It can take over a person's life, leading to financial problems, damaged relationships, and emotional distress. Warning signs of compulsive gambling include neglecting responsibilities, hiding the gambling behavior, and increasing the amount of time and money spent on it. Gambling activates the same reward centers in the brain as drugs and alcohol. Even when they know it's harmful to themselves and their loved ones, people with gambling disorder continue to gamble. However, recovery is possible. With the right support and treatment, people with gambling disorder can recover and reclaim their lives. They can rebuild relationships, regain financial stability, and find joy and peace again. If you or someone you know is struggling with compulsive gambling, remember that you are not alone. Reach out for support and take the first step towards a better future. For more information about treatment and recovery paths, please visit www.psychiatry.org.
Americans are expected to bet big money on March Madness. The American Gaming Association expects bettors in the U.S. to wager more than $2.72 billion on the men's and women's NCAA tournaments combined. That is roughly double the amount of bets placed on the Super Bowl. For some Americans, however, betting can become damaging to individuals and their families. The National Council on Problem Gambling says around 2.5 million adults in the United States have a severe gambling problem. Let's bring in CNET Managing Editor Nick Wolny. Nick, thanks very much for being with us. How big of a factor is the rise of online betting when it comes to gambling addiction in America? We see these ads everywhere, seemingly.
Yeah, one reason that the ads have become so prevalent is that there was some legislation overturned in 2018 that led to sports betting becoming much more mainstream. Basically, a Supreme Court decision overturned a past law from the early 90s that made the decision of sports betting go back down to the states. And so it's on a state-by-state basis whether or not sports betting is legalized, and that includes online gambling, that also includes access to gambling apps on your smartphone. So since 2018, there's now been 38 states that have legalized that gambling. And what it's caused is it has just made it way easier to participate in online gambling and also to participate in a very quick, rapid fire way. These apps will use things like rapid fire bonuses. And it's not just betting on a particular game, it's betting on what happens in a particular quarter. It's betting on whether someone makes the free throw during March Madness. And so during this time of year, when we're going to have 134 games in just under 3 weeks, there is loads of opportunity. There are bonuses flying around left and right, and it can be a really tempting landscape for people who might be susceptible to addiction.
And Nick, I know you've had conversations with people who are addicted to gambling. Can you tell us a bit about what they have told you? What have you heard from them?
Yeah, someone I spoke to earlier this week was talking about how they knew it was a problem. They knew they had reached the point of addiction when their pastime was no longer fun. Rather than him just sitting at the dinner table and telling his parents that he had to go to the bathroom, he would actually get up and run to the bathroom and place 3 bets,
Wow.
in just those 2 minutes in the
That's an
restroom.
addiction.
And I
It's an
think
addiction.
that's, yeah, exactly. I think that's kind of a good story that sort of summarizes what happens for a lot of people. We're not necessarily saying that gambling is bad or that online gambling is bad, but because it's so much more ubiquitous and available online with smartphones, 92% of all legal betting is now done online. What it really causes is it just makes it really easy to participate in that. And people don't realize that they're sliding into a situation. If you're getting to a point where you're doing it in isolation or you're not having fun while you're doing this, then it might be something to raise a red flag for. And if you have a loved one who's experiencing that in a similar way, just something for you to look out for.
Well, and Nick, we know that it's not just sports. We also hear about lottery and Mega Millions jackpots constantly. So what are some tips for people who may be addicted when it's, next to impossible, really, to avoid headlines about winning it big?
One thing to think about is just managing those notifications. So much of what we experience online is the result of both software and hardware using things like push notifications, haptic notifications. That's the when your phone vibrates or when your watch vibrates.
Hmm.
Maybe just being a little bit better with your digital hygiene on that is just something important to keep in mind. And then really thinking about the bigger picture from a personal finance perspective. In personal finance, we call it a sinking fund. It's when you open a savings or a checking account that just has some blow money in it, some fun money. You
Mm.
don't count it in net worth because you're going to put money into that vacation fund or whatever it is. And you know that you're going to spend every dollar of that and feel totally guilt free. That's actually a really healthy way to approach something like gambling or some other activity, entertainment activity or hobby, but to not be so attached to it that you end up spending money that you don't have and really starting to dig yourself into a hole. So something else to keep in mind for good personal finance acumen.
Right, that makes a lot of sense because you're creating essentially a boundary for yourself, right, Nick? It sounds like, as opposed to then trying to win it all back after you lose, and then that cycle would seem to continue. Really good tips there, Nick Wolney. Nick, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Got a gambling problem? It's not you, it's your relatives. Hey folks, Lacey Green here for D News. You're probably already well aware that gambling can be really addictive. What's a fun night on the town for most people can be a really toxic breeding ground for impulsive behavior in about 2 to 4% of the population. Gambling addiction works just like other types of addiction. The person becomes obsessed and they can't control themselves. It's the ultimate high. They'll continue to pursue the high even as they're running into financial problems and tearing their family apart. Some might even break the law or steal in order to recover their losses. Now, even though problem gambling is commonly seen as a personal failing by the mainstream, scientists have found that there's real biology behind the behavior. For many years, scientists thought that gambling was a matter of impulse control. I mean, claiming that gambling was like alcoholism was pretty controversial in the 70s and 80s. But last year, psychiatrists moved problem gambling to the addictions chapter of the DSM, reflecting our developed understanding of addiction in the brain. So this week, scientists have added more to that growing body of research about gambling, and they found some pretty important stuff. In a new study published in the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry, scientists have found that having a relative with a gambling problem puts you at 8 times the risk of developing one as well. Now, amongst those with gambling problems, 11% of the relatives had pathological issues. Compare that to the non-addicted population, where only 1% of their relatives have gambling problems. But here's the real kicker. Amongst the relatives of those with a gambling problem, the scientists also found a much higher prevalence of behavioral disorders like antisocial personality disorder and social anxiety. And those disorders in the relatives didn't necessarily overlap with the pathological gambling itself. There were some overlaps, though, with mood disorders. In the pathological gamblers, rates of bipolar disorder, major depression, and substance abuse were much more common. So what this suggests is that problem gambling and some psychiatric disorders may have some kind of shared genetic cause, which could hold the key to effective treatments and help us better understand psychiatric disorders in general. But scientists aren't quite sure what genes are at play yet. Thanks for watching D News, everyone. We'll be back soon with more science updates.
Gambling at the casino is a fun night on the town for many of us, but for some, gambling is an addiction, just like alcoholism. And all the new gaming venues here in the tri-state create new temptation for compulsive gamblers. Tonight in a special Healthy Living report, see what causes addiction and how one tri-state man finally found help.
The ads are seductive.
Your moment is waiting.
It is a high.
Gambling seduced Mike H. more than 15 years ago.
When the boat came to Lawrenceburg is when it started for me. And if there was a way to gamble, I would have been gambling long sooner, believe me, I sure would have.
Oh, look at 11.
Blackjack, roulette, and slots became much more than games to Mike.
It's a compulsion. I'm very compulsive about it. I'm a compulsive gambler.
But why is it that some of us can play and win or lose and then just walk away, while others become addicted? The answer is in your brain.
And there's a part of the brain that's deep inside the brain called the nucleus accumbens that's responsible for reward processing.
Dr. Stephen Strakowski is director of psychiatry at UC Health. He says addictions may develop because of deficiencies in this reward center.
Gambling, video games, the internet all activate these same parts of the brain that launch something called dopamine into the nucleus accumbens that tells your brain this is potentially rewarding.
Dr. Strakowski says many addictions go hand in hand. Mike is also a recovering alcoholic, and like many alcoholics, he smokes.
I'm addicted to anything that makes me feel good, I guess you could say, and I do it until I hurt.
The hurting threatened Mike's business, his marriage, and one night, his life.
I had been drinking and was coming back from Argosy, flipped my van, almost killed someone, and ended up having to go to the hospital.
Mike's wife gave him an ultimatum.
Yeah, you're having an affair on me, and it ain't with a woman, but you're having an affair with me down there with that boat.
Mike finally found help at Gamblers Anonymous, and now he's paying it forward by answering calls for their helpline.
But you just take the time.
Absolutely, I have to.
Gamblers Anonymous gives Mike support to resist temptation, especially with all the new gambling venues in the tri-state.
It certainly doesn't make it any easier for someone that is compulsive like me. I mean, you know, when it's coming at you from every billboard or every commercial. All right.
Perhaps he can't change a compulsive personality, but Mike has found a new, healthier addiction. He's sober and abstinent, and it feels good.
That ain't success, I don't know what ain't. That's pretty good.
For help and information about Gamblers Anonymous, we have a link on our website, WCPO.com, under Healthy Living.
The story is an astonishing one. It's about a sudden desire to live a secret life, and in the end, it cost a ton of money and nearly destroyed her family.
But even more surprising is what she says triggered this bizarre episode. Here's Fox 9 investigator Jeff Ballion to explain.
You know, at first I kind of tried to tell myself, oh, it's, you know, the kids are at school, it's my escape.
Denise Miley appeared to have a perfect life, a loving husband and 4 sons, a great job as a CPA, and a beautiful home in the Northwest Metro.
I hated the person I was, right? It wasn't me.
Her secret life started with a bike ride.
I think I thought if I was doing exercise at the same time, maybe it was okay that you were feeling like going there.
She'd pedal 35 miles from Maple Grove to Prior Lake until she found the instant gratification she was craving. She'd been an occasional gambler in the past, would hit the slots at Mystic Lake a couple of times a year, maybe drop $100. But in the fall of 2014, something changed. Miley was like a moth and the casino a brilliant light.
I can't explain it besides I just felt a compulsion to have to go.
The long bike rides gave way to more frequent car rides.
I mean, I would be dressed for work, ready for work, and I would find myself heading to the casino instead of going to work.
She'd stay there till late at night or even the next day, telling her family she was at the office working.
I felt like I couldn't stop.
She switched from slots to high-stakes blackjack, used cash from her kids' college fund to wager up to $4,000 a hand. At one point, she took out a secret loan for $50,000.
So in total, how much money did you lose?
I think at the end of it, I think it was $156,000.
Her husband pleaded with her to get help. He took her car away. She'd ride the bus to work, but didn't stay there.
I would get on the light rail, take the light rail to the Mall of America, would take a bus from the Mall of America to the casino.
One night, she was up $50,000, enough to pay off that secret loan.
I couldn't stop myself till it was all gone.
Gone in an hour. But the breaking point didn't come until the night her kids FaceTimed her at the casino, pleading to please come home.
Being there for my kids and setting a good example for my kids is probably one of the most important things for me.
The next day, she was finally on her way to treatment.
No way, this can't be happening.
She revealed her secret to close friend Kim Swadish.
I couldn't fathom, I couldn't reconcile that person with the person that I've known for over 10 years.
Before starting her 6-month-long casino run, Denise had been suffering from depression. Her doctor put her on Abilify, also known as aripiprazole, a drug that affects the dopamine system in the brain, which controls our desires to seek reward. When she entered gambling treatment, a counselor recommended she stop taking Abilify.
The urges that you had, these overwhelming urges, started to go away, I would say probably a week after I was there.
Was the drug the reason for her uncontrollable desire to gamble?
But what that woman described is very eerily similar to a lot of the other patients that we see, where they just wake up and they just have this natural urge and hunger and desire to do a behavior.
Reports of a possible connection between Abilify and compulsive behaviors such as gambling got the attention of European regulators back in 2012. Drug makers Bristol-Myers Squibb and Otsuka Pharmaceuticals were required to put a warning on the Abilify label that pathological gambling was a possible side effect.
That is the tragedy here, is the American patients did not learn about the connection with gambling and compulsivity until almost 4 years after the European patients did.
Not until last summer, more than a year after Denise Miley's bizarre gambling binge, did the FDA require a similar label warning in the United States. She's now suing the makers of Abilify. They declined to comment or respond to questions from the Fox 9 investigators.
She came out of treatment and you were off Abilify. No more gambling?
I've not gambled since.
According to the FDA, the condition is rare. In most cases, patients had no prior history of compulsive behavior until they started taking the drug.
In probably about the 5 or 6 cases I've seen specific to Abilify, every single one of those cases, when they stopped Abilify, they've been able to achieve meaningful, almost essential sobriety or abstinence from gambling.
That's also been the case for Denise Miley.
Now I don't feel that compulsion.
She spent the past 2 years trying to rebuild trust with her family, friends, and coworkers. The notes her kids sent while she was in treatment serve as a reminder of that dark chapter in her life. Like this one: "Mom, we all love you. Please, can you just not lie and spend more time with us?"
I'm thankful I was able to get help, right? Before I lost my family.
More than 200 people nationwide have joined that lawsuit against the makers of Abilify, all of them claiming the drug turned them into gambling addicts. But according to the FDA, it may also cause compulsive shopping, eating, and sexual activity.
So is there any way of knowing who might be susceptible to these side effects?
No, that's a mystery. It can happen to men and women, adults and children. There does not appear to be any rhyme or reason for who will develop this condition, just that it is rare.
Wow.
Well, there is a new form of online gambling taking off in popularity, a never-ending stream of betting available at your computer 24 hours a day, making it very easy to learn and easy to win. But there's a flip side to all of this. This type of gambling is so accessible, addiction experts say it is especially dangerous. Channel 2's Andy Sirota reveals the risks and the efforts to shut it down.
Every sport, every play, a new form of online gambling is taking off.
You'll bet on a variety of players.
It's called proposition betting, designed for the casual gamer.
Like a coin toss or who's going to score the first touchdown. You bet on whether it's heads or tails.
Will Brock Osweiler throw an interception? How long will Lady Gaga's rendition of the national anthem last? You get the idea. Scenarios you don't have to give much thought, but have the potential for big payoffs.
It's almost like the next tier. It's just the next thing.
Hugh is a compulsive gambler who says prop betting fuels gambling addiction. Underground websites make access easy.
It takes over so much of their life.
We found live prop bets all day, every day. Soccer, baseball, basketball, even tennis matches offering instant gratification.
Many sites are based offshore, so you might be wondering, is this illegal?
If you are receiving some type of benefit when you win, besides just kind of fantasy points, Yes, it is.
Criminal defense attorney Rand Mintzer says this type of gambling is a Class A misdemeanor. If you're caught, it's up to a year in jail.
Texas has always been very hardline and anti-gambling.
Federal agents have shut down some websites, but others just pop up. Mintzer says legal action against individual gamblers is rare. The real risk is to your livelihood.
No one wants to admit that they're completely that their life's out of control.
At the height of his gambling, Hugh was using money from his own company to cover the losses and more bets.
You're always either thinking about a game or you're thinking about when to pay the bookie.
Psychiatrist Dr. Patrick Thomas says prop betting is particularly dangerous for someone at risk for addiction and someone who doesn't know much about sports.
Say bet on whether the song that's sung for a game is rock and roll or R&B. That lowers any kind of thought that might go into it or reflection about, well, do I really want to bet on this? Do I want to use this that way?
He says gambling addiction leads to other diseases like depression. Soon, life is spiraling out of control.
My wife is threatening to leave me because I've blown my kids' college savings.
Hugh knew he had to stop. He joined Gamblers Anonymous and got help.
It's been over 16 years since I've placed a bet, and my life's gotten much better.
The gambling addict we featured spoke publicly about his disease to help others who are struggling to find the help they need. We put a link to Gamblers Anonymous on our website, click2houston.com. Look for this story on the homepage. Andy Sirota, KPRC Channel 2 News.
We're going to turn now to our GMA cover story in our series Cracking the Kid Code. We're highlighting teens and gambling, a growing issue since 2018 when the Supreme Court struck down the federal ban on sports betting. Now about 31 states and Washington, D.C. have legalized it, and our Juju Chang has more. Good morning, Juju.
Good morning, Michael. You know, online gambling is the fastest form of gambling in the world, according to a recent report. Nearly 3,000 internet sites and growing. We've been following one teenager battling a gambling addiction. He spoke to us in shadow with his voice altered. He wound up thousands of dollars in debt, but it wasn't just the financial damage. He says underage gambling left his young life in shambles.
Online gambling is popping up everywhere, with kids and teens enticed by the risks and the rewards.
If you have a phone on you and you have connection to the internet, you can gamble whenever you want.
Steve is an 18-year-old speaking candidly to GMA about his gambling addiction, which began at age 15. He's asked to be in shadow, to use a different name and alter his voice to hide his identity.
All it took was playing dice. From there, it just kind of grew.
How much did you win?
It's a couple $100.
That was your first hit.
That was like the first high.
Steve says that from there, the desire to gamble intensified, his sports obsession morphing into an illegal sports betting obsession, making bets not just on wins and losses, but putting money on every inning or every basket.
It's not about just watching a sports game. It's more about watching for the money.
The legal age for gambling in the U.S. is 18 or 21, depending on the state and the type of game. But experts warn that early exposure can lead to gambling addiction.
Teenagers and young people are significantly at higher risk of developing gambling disorder than adults, in part because their brains are not fully developed. Their ability to evaluate risk, their ability to handle loss, isn't as secure as an adult.
Steve says he was able to access legal sports betting sites by using other people's accounts who were of age to illegally gamble. He also used unregulated offshore illegal websites.
Our culture is seeing young adults raised in a society where gambling is the norm, and people don't think of it as risky anymore.
For Steve, gambling became a full-time job, placing bets during school and staying up all night.
I kind of use gambling as an escape.
And he says he began lying and stealing money to pay back debts.
It affected my relationship with my family, with some of my closest friends. There were days where I was kind of just sleepwalking.
His father, who we're calling Martin, also asked to have his voice altered to protect his identity. He says at first he and his wife failed to fully grasp how destructive his son's gambling addiction had become.
What did you miss along the way? What do other parents miss?
How quickly it became an obsession.
With his family support, Steve has joined a 12-step program.
gone to rehab, and is now in recovery.
What do parents need to know?
Advertisements, all the commercials, like, they really make it seem like it's like a good thing. I've never seen a commercial talking about the downsides of it.
How many parents out there do you think are aware that their teenage boys have a gambling problem?
Not as many as there are.
We reached out to the American Gaming Association, who told us the U.S. gaming industry invests hundreds of millions of dollars annually in consumer education, employee training, research, and support. Our collective responsible gaming commitment includes comprehensive protocols in place to verify the identity and age of customers. It's our priority that gaming remains entertainment strictly for adults. But Steve's dad says it's not enough.
It's in every sporting event. There's advertisements constantly. We don't sit and watch a game together like we might have done when he was younger. It has been hard to have removed that from our relationship. There's just not that level of education, and there's just not that level of awareness of it as a problem.
Now, since our interview, Steve is doing well with setbacks and regularly attends gambling 12-step meetings. His family says they're just grateful to have their son back in a normal way of life and living. Experts say the key is to talk to your kids about the risks of gambling and have open conversations. If you or a loved one is struggling with a problem gambling, call the National Problem Gambling Helpline at the number on the screen or go to ncpgambling.org. Confidential support is available 24/7. Guys?
Very important message.
Sure
and
is.
see how easy it is
Absolutely.
to slip.
Yeah, thank
Very
you, Juju.
slippery slopes. Thank you so much, Juju.
Well, hey there, GMA fans. Robin Roberts here. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Lots of great stuff here. So go on, click the subscribe button right over here to get more of awesome videos and content from GMA every day, anytime. We thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the morning on GMA.
These bright lights disguise a darker truth. Many of these gambling machines are designed to be addictive, as Kathy Smith learned the hard way.
And it just can spiral into total disaster.
She always enjoyed the casino, but when the pandemic hit, stuck at home, she found a slot machine at her fingertips.
I had my phone right with me. So anywhere I was, at work, at home, in the car, at a stoplight, just had to keep hitting those buttons.
Smith works in a hospital and says gambling offered an escape from the pressures of work. But before long, she'd lost more than $200,000.
The gambling part of me wants to keep gambling to win more money to pay off those debts. That's where it becomes a vicious cycle.
When your hands begin to sweat.
Psychologist Michael Dixon isn't surprised.
The most frequent outcome is the full loss.
He runs the Gambling Research Lab at the University of Waterloo. He wired me up with conductance sensors to reveal gambling's physiological power.
It's got these huge arousal inducing properties, but also huge motivational properties.
He says the most insidious feature of some gambling machines, both real and virtual, is known as losses disguised as wins. For example, I bet 15 cents and lose 10, but you'd almost never know it. The machine chimes and suggests I've won 5 cents, even though I lost 10, which you need to look closely to see.
Celebrating the fact that you've lost money.
My autonomic excitement response spikes. It feels like I'm winning.
You get the same arousal response. So your heart will beat faster, your hands will start to sweat. From the body's perspective, they're the same. So that's where the danger lies.
These machines are also designed to produce carefully timed near misses to keep players motivated. Ontario slot machines generate around $2 billion a year, but 60% of that revenue comes from just 2% of players, those with severe gambling problems, like Smith.
It terrifies and horrifies me, but yet I still couldn't stop myself.
She's still struggling to stop, with support from this Montreal addictions therapist, speaking out in hopes of breaking the stigma and encouraging others to seek help.
Because I'm sure it's like a silent epidemic. I'm sure there's many, many people that don't talk about it.
Jeff Semple, Global News, Toronto.
Tomorrow, Jeff looks at when gambling leads to violence and how hitting rock bottom pushed this recovering addict into a life of helping others.
Years ago, this woman we'll call Sue lost her husband, was living on a fixed income with 2 young children. She thought gambling could supplement her income, but after 4 years of compulsive gambling, she was broke.
It's devastating. It's devastating. It brings you to a point of wanting to commit suicide.
She lived with the hope she would win.
I thought, Meg, that if I won enough money, all my problems would be solved. And that has nothing to do with it.
There is research now that shows that gambling disorders are very similar to substance abuse disorders.
Psychologists and counselors with the Jefferson Parish Human Services Authority say oftentimes people have both substance and gambling disorders. Both report withdrawals, cravings, getting high, and relapsing. There is a genetic component, and people with alcoholism in their families are more at risk for gambling disorder. Studies show adolescent smokers, people with alcohol dependence, and gamblers have lower activation in the reward pathways in the brain. But there is treatment, and at JP Human Services Authority, it's free.
The triggers to gambling, as well as some coping skills to deal with those needs to gamble. Oftentimes, people that have gambling diagnoses have trauma in their past life also. So we'll deal with those underlying issues that feed into some of that gambling behavior.
Sue credits another group, Gamblers Anonymous, for being in recovery now for 22 years.
Everything I thought I wanted from gambling, I got from not gambling.
Like what?
Like I'm able to travel, I have money in the bank.
And her family at her side. Meg Farris, Eyewitness News.
And gambling problems can start in teens as young as 14 years old. Seeing parents gamble or playing video games can increase the risk of gambling later in life. And we do have hotline numbers for you to get help on our website, wwltv.com.
Of online betting sparked the commercial gambling industry to explode all over the world. But now a new report says it's posing a significant threat to public health. The report found nearly 16% of adults and more than 26% of adolescents who use slot machine games and online casinos have a gambling disorder. Researchers estimate this addiction could affect nearly 9% of adults and more than 16% of adolescents who gamble using sports betting products. In the U.S., sports betting is legal in 38 states and Washington, D.C. Georgia currently does not allow legal sports betting.
Although Tennessee doesn't have any casinos, the growing trend of sports betting is no longer strange to our state. According to Gambling Clinic, 1 to 2% of our population may be addicted to gambling, and another 3 to 5% may still struggle with risky behaviors. However, experts want anyone struggling to know there is help. Even a short stint of group therapy sessions can help find you peace and help mend relationships with those around you.
On average, a person with a gambling problem is realizing harm to 6 other people in their life, and they're usually the people that are closest to them. So when you do the math on that, we go from 250,000 people that probably have a problem to 1.5 million people that are being harmed because of gambling problems.
I don't know, $50 on 15 minutes.
Laura Bertuccio is bipolar and has a gambling disorder, a recognized mental health disorder. As she documents in this cell phone video, she's sometimes unable to stop playing the slots.
So all of this is to help your fight?
Bertuccio's on disability welfare after a work injury and still can't stop gambling.
I have flashbacks of me crying hysterically at the machine. There's a lot of people like me with mental illness at the machines trying to deal with life.
She wants the BC government to make good on a promise from 2015 to introduce something called a pre-commitment card. Used with slot machines, the card would allow gamblers to set limits on how much time and money they want to spend before they hit a casino. 5 years ago, BC's then provincial health officer wrote a report urging government to spend more of its gambling revenues on programs for gamblers in trouble, programs like a pre-commitment card, still not in place.
I think it's a shame. I think it's a missed opportunity, and there are people who've probably suffered because of the absence of such a program.
A leading gambling researcher in Canada has looked at the billions governments make in gambling revenue and how little gets funneled back into programs that might help severe gambling addicts.
problem gamblers account for roughly 1/3 of all the gambling revenue. And so if you're going to do something effective, it's going to compromise your revenue. And so we don't do much in the way of effective programs in Canada. So the revenue keeps on coming in.
No, it's unacceptable.
BC's minister responsible for gaming says the province does need to spend more of its gambling revenue helping those that gambling hurts.
I fear that for too long the calculation on gambling has been a short-term equation, and we need to be thinking more long-term about it, and we are now.
Erica joins us now. So Erica, is BC going to introduce these player pre-commitment cards?
Well, the province just wrapped up a test pilot of these cards at 2 casinos in Kamloops, BC. So the minister says he's hopeful that these cards will come out soon, but the BC Lottery Corporation says it wants time to review the data, that in fact it may do more testing, and it wants to look at other jurisdictions that have this system in place. In Ontario, pre-commitment cards are in place in 2 casinos, and Ontario plans to roll out those cards very soon right across the province.
So if almost 1 million Canadians have a gambling problem of some kind, what kind of money are we talking about here?
We're talking big money. According to an industry research group, last year, Canadians generated over $17 billion in gambling revenue. Here in BC, that figure was $3.3 billion, and the province got to keep $1.4 billion of that money. Now, it only spent a tiny fraction of that money, $5.6 million or 0.4% of all revenues on programs for responsible and problem gambling.
So it's a money-making business. Erica, thanks for this, as always. And if you have a story that you want Erica and her team to investigate, email gopublic@cbc.ca.
Overcoming a gambling addiction requires the person to admit that they have a problem with gambling. This is incredibly difficult for people who suffer from all addictions. Addictions are shrouded in these two elements, this one being this denial, where people deny that they have a problem, and this rationalization that tells them that they may have a problem, but it's not as bad as it really is. So denial and rationalization are two things that keep people from engaging in a meaningful recovery program. Getting past that requires the person to reach out and to get over the shame, get over the secrecy that surrounds their addiction, and ask someone for help. Typically, this involves a professional who has the capacity and the credentials to deal with addictions, to deal with addictive disorders, but it doesn't necessarily need to happen that way. There are programs available for people who also suffer from addictive disorders that you can plug into, that you can go to and find a community of other people who have found a solution to their gambling problem. So there's a way that you can tap into this community of other people who are also in recovery, and that will enable you to experience recovery around your own gambling addiction.